As someone who just watched The Sopranos, I've been so excited for the Many Saints of Newark, but you know, I've really been practicing a very particular line from the series that many of our characters say. Let me try. Oh! Did I do a good job? No? I'll work on it. What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to another real review. Today we're diving right into the Many Saints of Newark, the prequel film to help us understand Tony Soprano as a kid and as a teenager. This is a movie that I've been anticipating as a big fan of the series, so I cannot wait to finally dive into my spoiler-free thoughts. A huge thank you to Warner Brothers for giving me the chance to see it in person, and if you don't know, it's directed by Alan Taylor, and it's starring Alessandro Nivola, Leslie Odom Jr., Ray Liotta, Vera Farmiga, and John Bernthal. Now what's great is that it's in theaters and streaming on HBO Max, so if you can't get to a theater, you can at least watch it on HBO Max, but if you are a fan of The Sopranos, guys, you're gonna want to watch this movie. If you don't know too much about the Many Saints of Newark, it really is just a prequel film that showcases the people around Tony Soprano as he grew up and became the Tony we know in the classic series, The Sopranos. I remember people going crazy for The Sopranos, and now I understand as an adult. I wasn't watching this as a kid. But hey, before we get into my review for the Many Saints of Newark, and I tell you what I liked and what I didn't like too much about this movie, if it is your first time here at the channel, welcome to Real James, where we talk about movies like this all the time, so you're not going to want to miss out. Go ahead and hit the big red button below, subscribe to the channel, and tap on that bell, y'all, and hit the thumbs up button too if you're a fan of The Sopranos, and get loud down below and let me know which character from the show or from the movie is your favorite. Alrighty, y'all, so let's get right into why I really like The Many Saints of Newark, and it starts with this. This film is really just one long episode of The Sopranos, and I love that. That is the first thing I said once the end credits began to roll. It is just a very long 2-hour episode of The Sopranos with layers, with compelling storylines, and with a lot of backstory. I think fans like myself will enjoy so many callbacks to the series and seeing questions they had answered on the big screen. I mean, we get a lot of things filled in, like the arrest of Johnny Soprano at that carnival scene, and then how Junior hurt his back, and even Tony getting counseling as a teenager, which kind of plays into that parallel of him getting counseling from Dr. Melfi as an adult. And it's also just amazing to see some of these characters brought to life after hearing about them in this series, like Dickie Moltisanti, father of Christopher Moltisanti. Then you have his father, Hollywood Dick Moltisanti. And it's just awesome to see some amazing legends in Hollywood play these characters. And speaking of our cast, let's get into that now, because there are some solid performances here that really do pay a great deal of respect to some of our legacy characters from The Sopranos. It was just so cool to see some of these actors really get into character for this role, like Corey Stoll with Junior Soprano, and even the impressive duo of Silvio and Paulie was incredible. John Magaro really nails it as Silvio with the mannerisms and even just the way he walks. And then there's Billy Magnuson as Paulie, who, not a very good character. Actually, not a lot of the characters in The Sopranos are good people, but what I will say is that Billy Magnuson has this charm as Paulie that kind of makes you gravitate towards the character in this movie. And when it comes to Dickie Moltisanti, we don't get too much of him in the original series other than some mentions, so I thought it was great witnessing Alessandro Nivola's acting here. To me, he delivers by far the best and most dynamic performance in the movie. He's able to balance this wide range of emotion with the character because, honestly, Dickie Moltisanti deals with remorse, rage, past trauma, and marital issues that play into this character, and it's all put on full display for 2 hours. Trust me, there were some moments where I needed a breather because a lot of this was incredibly heavy source material, and people better not overlook this next actor, Vera Farmiga as Livia Soprano. Now yes, we know that Tony's mother was a little annoying in this show, but I do think that Vera Farmiga gives an incredible supporting performance here, and she just disappears into the role at times too. Her back and forth with John Bernthal, who plays Johnny Soprano, was really excellent, and John Bernthal himself did a pretty good job, even though I think his role was a little bit more limited than I expected. But all eyes are gonna be on Michael Gandolfini, James Gandolfini's son. Michael is playing Tony Soprano here, and it's really during his formative years that we get the most of young Tony Soprano, so we don't get a lot of him, right, in that first act and even the first half of the second act. Once the film starts to get closer to the end, we do see more of Michael Gandolfini on screen, but when he is on screen, guys, I think he nails the essence of the character and how James Gandolfini added his own little touch to the role. I think Michael Gandolfini does something very similar in the movie. And trust me, we'll talk more about why this movie is less about Tony Soprano and really more about everyone around him. Alrighty, so let's get into my next point, which is, guys, I love the emphasis that this movie places on the race riots in the 60s and really just how the black community interacted with, at the time, the Italian community in Jersey. There's a great deal of focus on Leslie Odom Jr.'s character here, Harold, and with David Chase, who created The Sopranos, involved in this project, I had a feeling we get a lot of focus on just the core families in Jersey, but no. David Chase surprised me in a good way by focusing on the unequal treatment shown to black families during the 60s. There's a really big focus on Harold in this movie, and I thought Leslie Odom Jr. did a great job and he was perfect for the role. And I am really glad they almost showed most of his character arc in this. I think there was still some left up to the imagination, but I do think that Harold as a character was fed up from taking instructions from Dickie Moltisanti and wanted to own a piece of his own block while taking care of his family and his community. So I thought that them focusing a lot on this, especially in the first half of the movie, it pleasantly surprised me. I mean, considering that the series itself doesn't really focus on the black community that's in Jersey, I thought was a really good choice to switch it up here in the film. Alrighty, so outside of the film delivering on both acting and some awesome story choices, let's talk technically about how this movie looks, because guys, it's a beautiful film. And I love that the movie features shots that were both horrifying yet breathtaking, and this area of the movie might be the second most surprising element of the Many Saints of Newark, because I did not expect me to leave the theater saying, wow, this movie looked really good. Cinematographer Kramer Morgenthau, who actually worked on Thor: The Dark World, if I'm not mistaken, with director Alan Taylor, I think that they both had this awesome rapport, and you can tell that scenes were really fluid and everything looked good and things were allowed to breathe, which is why I'm glad this movie was 2 hours anyway. Kramer Morgenthau really does capture this period of time beautifully, and he makes some of the more gut-wrenching scenes feel that much more personal and intimate. There's this moment at the beach with Dickie, and I don't think I blinked once. And then the way he captures a certain scene with the drill almost made me cough up my dinner. Yeah, it was rough. Alrighty guys, so before we get into the negatives, let's talk about this last positive, which is how this movie is not so much about Tony Soprano, but more about the family. Now, I do think this is going to be make or break for some viewers, because the marketing really does tell us, if you don't know anything about the story, hey, this is going to be all about Tony Soprano, but instead it's more so about Dickie Moltisanti. Like I said, we get more of Tony at the end of the second act and into the third act, but I'm okay with this being about Dickie Moltisanti because, guys, this is how we start to piece together why Tony is the way he is. His tendencies to gamble, his rage and his temper that he gets from his favorite uncle, who also supplies him with material things that he's stolen, like speakers. So when we get Tony Soprano with his home with Carmela and the family, we see Tony obsessing over his home theater room with getting the biggest and baddest speakers. And why? Because his uncle was giving this to him when he was a teen. It's just incredible to see all these pieces tied together, and honestly, this area of the movie only works if you've seen the entire Sopranos series. But honestly guys, these moments only work as well as they do because I've seen the entire series, and I do remember a lot of what happens in The Sopranos, so if you need a refresher, go and check out some of the more crucial moments, or even do a rewatch for yourself after you see the film, because you're going to start piecing things together, and it really does make the film even greater. But if you haven't watched The Sopranos, guys, this is where I think the film is not going to really work for you. So let's get right into my negatives, and I'll say this. I do not think The Many Saints of Newark is going to be accessible for wide audiences. And that's okay, because even though most mainstream audiences have at least heard of The Sopranos or know what happens in The Sopranos, if you have not watched it from beginning to end, this movie's not going to work for you. There were several critics in our screening that didn't watch The Sopranos at all, had no knowledge of anything that happened, right? And they walked away incredibly confused by the film. I mean, I remember almost squealing in my seat because the opening scene has a voiceover track from Christopher Moltisanti himself, and not many other people were as excited. And that is kind of sad, even though I was sitting next to a fellow critic who is a fan of The Sopranos, and we kind of understood each other, like, okay, we know why the scene's in important, but there were times where I wanted to almost say, oh my gosh, and nobody else really said, oh my gosh, with me. So there are just going to be some of these scenes here that are not going to make sense for people who do not understand anything about The Sopranos. And that is not always the best thing, especially when you're trying to appeal to a big audience. But hey, maybe Alan Taylor and David Chase weren't expecting to cast a wide net with this movie anyway. So let's get into another area, which is editing. And it's weird because editing, if it's really good, you don't necessarily notice it, but if it's bad, it's something we'll talk about. And here, guys, there were many times where I felt scenes were just kind of jumbled and mashed together. And I do think that's because the film does try to breeze past some of the minor moments to get to some major plot developments, and that's an issue too. The movie's trying to tackle too much at times, and I noticed that especially in the middle of the film where we're seeing Silvio and Paulie in action, right? And that's okay, but they go by so quickly. And there are times where we're getting into a funeral scene, and right before then we're getting a very random scene that feels out of place only to showcase one of our legacy characters. So there wasn't a lot of consistency in the middle of the movie, but luckily in that third act, things really do fire on all cylinders, so it washes away that bad taste, although it's worth mentioning that the editing at times is just a little choppy. And guys, while this is a period piece film, I still found the racism just as uncomfortable in the movie as I did in the series. And I get it, y'all. That's the intention of this movie, right? That's the intention of these moments in The Sopranos. It's to make the viewer feel uncomfortable, because if you're okay with it, well, you gotta go see God about that. But I will tell you that this movie does have some moments, especially with John Bernthal, where I thought, oh man, this just feels icky. Luckily though, they do give Harold a great deal of screen time and have some awesome moments with him, and I won't say what happens that makes you think like, alright, listen, they're balancing it here. But I will tell you that it did take me out of certain scenes because immediately I thought, no, this doesn't sound right. And lastly, guys, before we get into my overall thoughts, for as much as I enjoyed the acting here, there's one decision made with an actor in particular that did not work for me, and that's Ray Liotta, who plays Hollywood Dick Moltisanti, the father of Dickie Moltisanti. The thing is, there's also a moment they show us Hollywood Dick's brother, who's also played by Ray Liotta, so I'm guessing that they're twins, but the problem here is there's not much of a separation between both characters for my mind not to shut off. And when we got it, there were some laughs in the crowd, and that's probably not the reaction they wanted from that reveal. Instead, maybe they wanted a, oh my gosh, but people were laughing because to me, I don't think that it was the smartest choice, and it just looked a little awkward, and it felt awkward too. So even though that wasn't as believable as the rest of the movie, guys, that doesn't take away from the Many Saints of Newark being a solid movie. It really is catering more so to the fans of The Sopranos, and you know what? It gave me what I wanted, right? I wanted something to feel like an entire Sopranos episode. I really felt like I was watching an episode of The Sopranos with a packed theater, and that was such a cool feeling, especially at times where you can hear some of the fans that really understand The Sopranos and their reactions, and you're like, yeah, I get you, buddy. There are some great performances here led by Alessandro Nivola, and I just love the fact that this cast really buys into every single role. And to me, this is shot much better in some ways than The Sopranos too. So this movie just gives us everything from acting to some technical achievements when it comes to cinematography and even the pacing. I mean, for 2 hours, y'all, I did not feel like this dragged at all. And when we left the theater, I wanted more. I actually wanted more from this. So if they're going to go and do some more of these prequel stories, I wouldn't be opposed. But I will say that this movie gave me exactly what I wanted. And that's why I thought I came away so happy with The Many Saints of Newark. So guys, there you have it. That's my real review of The Many Saints of Newark, a movie that does right by fans of The Sopranos. So when you see it, let me know down below, what did you think of the movie? Did it really pay homage to those legacy characters, or were you a little disappointed? And if you haven't already, hit the big red button below, subscribe to the channel, and tap on that bell, y'all, and hit the thumbs up button if you haven't already. It's already a busy October, y'all. I mean, we have Venom 2 dropping today, which my review is also live up on the channel, and we got Dune coming up, Halloween Kills. Mamma mia, I'm gonna need some water and maybe a cannoli. I actually kind of want a cannoli now. Alrighty, y'all. Again, thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you at the next screening.